I never thought I'd be the type of woman who would dig through her dead husband's things, searching for secrets. But grief makes detectives of us all, I suppose. Richard had been gone for 6 months when I finally found the courage to clean out his study. 43 years of marriage, and still there were corners of his life I had never explored. His sturdy oak desk, where he'd graded papers for decades at Elmwood College, held more than just red pens and academic journals. In the bottom drawer, beneath a false panel I discovered by accident, lay a wooden box, hand-carved maple with inlaid mother of pearl. Beautiful, expensive, and completely unfamiliar to me. Inside were letters, dozens of them, spanning nearly our entire marriage, all in Richard's precise handwriting, all addressed to someone named Eleanor. I sat there on the floor of his study, surrounded by books on 18th century literature that had been his life's passion, and opened the first one. It was dated May 12th, 1982, just 3 years after we'd been married. My dearest Eleanor, the dogwoods are blooming again, and I'm reminded of that spring we spent walking through the gardens at Kensington. You said something that day I've never forgotten, that everyone deserves at least one perfect day that they can hold on to when life becomes unbearable. That was my perfect day, though I didn't know it then. I saw a woman who looked like you yesterday in the faculty dining hall. For a moment, my heart stopped. Even after all this time, the possibility of you appearing in my everyday life is enough to undo me. Forever yours, Richard. My hands trembled as I picked up another letter, this one from 1997. My dearest Eleanor, Margaret and I celebrated our 18th anniversary last week. She surprised me with tickets to the symphony, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Do you remember how we once listened to it on that old record player in your apartment? How you closed your eyes during the adagio, and I watched your face instead of listening to the music? I have built a good life here, a respectable life. Margaret is kind and intelligent, everything a man should want in a wife. Our daughters are thriving. Yet there are moments when the weight of what might have been settles on my chest until I can hardly breathe. I never mailed the first letter I wrote you, nor any that followed. I suppose these pages have become more diary than correspondence. Still, writing to you keeps something alive in me that I fear would otherwise wither and die. Forever yours, Richard. Margaret. That's me. Described as kind and intelligent, the academic's sensible choice. Not the woman who made his heart stop in faculty dining halls. Not the woman he thought of when he heard Rachmaninoff. I spent the afternoon reading every letter, watching our life together unfold through my husband's words to another woman. There were gaps, sometimes years would pass between letters, but they always resumed. Through our daughter's graduations, through my breast cancer scare in 2001, through his retirement 5 years ago. The most recent was dated just 3 weeks before the stroke that took him from me. My dearest Eleanor, I saw in the alumni newsletter that you've retired from your position at Berkeley. 40 years of shaping young minds in art history. What a remarkable legacy. I wonder if you ever think of that semester we taught together at Columbia. Before everything changed, I've started a small garden in the backyard. Margaret thinks it's a charming hobby for my retirement, but the truth is I'm growing all the flowers you used to love. Bleeding hearts, forget-me-nots, sweet alyssum, a secret tribute hidden in plain sight. I wonder sometimes if I made the right choice all those years ago, the safe choice, the proper choice, but that I look at the life I've built with Margaret, at our beautiful daughters and now grandchildren, and I know I cannot regret the path I chose. One can love deeply in different ways, I've learned. Yet still, after all this time, when the spring light falls a certain way, I find myself looking for you. Forever yours, Richard. I folded the last letter carefully and returned it to the box. Then I went outside to look at my husband's garden. The small plot behind our colonial revival house that he had tended so devotedly in his final months now revealed itself for what it truly was: a living love letter to a woman named Eleanor. That night, I poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet we'd been saving for our anniversary and sat on the patio overlooking Richard's flowers. I felt hollow, as if my insides had been scooped out and replaced with something alien and cold. Not quite anger, not quite sadness, something in between. A grief for a marriage I now realized I'd never fully inhabited. I considered burning the letters, digging up the garden, erasing this Eleanor person from our property, our history. But as the wine warmed my blood, another feeling emerged. Curiosity. Who was this woman who had claimed such a persistent place in my husband's heart? What had happened between them? And why had Richard chosen me instead? It took surprisingly little detective work to find her. Eleanor Voss, art history professor emeritus from UC Berkeley, now retired and living in a small town on the California coast. There was a brief faculty bio online with her photograph, a striking woman with silver hair cut in an elegant bob, intelligent eyes, high cheekbones, beautiful in a way that suggested she'd been breathtaking in her youth. I spent a week debating what to do with this information. In the end, it wasn't vengeance or confrontation that drove me to action, but a simple desire to understand the shape of my own life. I booked a flight to San Francisco, rented a car, and drove north along the coast to the address I'd found through a property record search. The cottage was perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by a riot of wildflowers and native grasses. It looked like something from a fairy tale, the kind of place where an artist or poet might retreat from the world. I sat in my rental car for nearly an hour, rehearsing what I might say. In the end, I simply walked up to the door and knocked. The woman who answered matched the photograph, but her presence was somehow more commanding in person. She wore loose linen pants and a tunic, paint splattered across both. Her eyes, a startling shade of amber, widened slightly when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low and melodious. "My name is Margaret Sullivan," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Richard Sullivan's wife. I believe you knew my husband." A series of emotions crossed her face. Shock, something that might have been pain, and then a careful composure. "Margaret," she said softly. "Yes, I knew Richard, many years ago." She invited me in. The cottage was filled with light and art, paintings leaning against walls, ceramics crowding shelves, books stacked on every surface. Through large windows, I could see the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, and without waiting for an answer, moved toward a small kitchen. I followed, noting how gracefully she moved for a woman who must be in her mid-70s. "Richard died 6 months ago," I said, watching her carefully. "A stroke." Her hand faltered slightly as she filled the kettle. "I'm very sorry to hear that," she said. "Though I suppose you're wondering why I'd care after all this time." "I found the letters," I said simply. Eleanor set the kettle down and turned to face me. "He sent you my letters?" "No." I shook my head. "His letters, to you, dozens of them, spanning our entire marriage. None of them were ever mailed." She sank slowly onto a kitchen stool. I don't understand. Neither do I admitted. That's why I'm here. Over tea served in handmade ceramic mugs, Eleanor Voss told me about the Richard Sullivan she had known, a brilliant young literature professor she'd met during a visiting semester at Columbia in 1978. Their affair had been intense but brief. When Richard received the job offer from Elmwood College, he had asked Eleanor to come with him. But I had just been offered a position at Berkeley, she explained, turning her mug slowly in her hands. It was unprecedented. They'd never hired a female full professor in the art history department. I couldn't give that up, even for him. So he chose his career and you chose yours, I said. She looked at me with those remarkable eyes. It wasn't that simple. I suggested a long-distance relationship. I was willing to try. But Richard, she hesitated. Richard came from a traditional family. His father was a minister. His mother never worked outside the home. He wanted that life. The faculty wife, children, Sunday dinners, the respectability of it. And 3 months after he declined your suggestion, he met me, I finished for her. The English department secretary with a sensible haircut and a degree in library science. Eleanor winced slightly. I didn't mean to imply. I waved away her concern. It's fine. I'm not the same woman I was 45 years ago either. I'm just trying to understand. We ran into each other at a conference in Chicago in 1982, Eleanor continued. By then, he was married to you. We had dinner, talked about old times. At the end of the evening, he told me he made the right choice, that he was happy. And after that? Nothing, she said simply. I never saw or spoke to Richard again. I stared at her. Nothing? No letters, no calls, no reconnection of any kind? Eleanor shook her head, confusion evident on her face. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the letters, the last one, about the garden. I watched as she read it, her elegant hands trembling slightly. I had no idea, she whispered. All these years, 40 years of letters, I said. A lifetime of longing for a woman who never knew. We sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of ocean waves crashing against the cliff below filling the cottage. Why did you come here, Margaret? Eleanor finally asked. What are you looking for? It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself on the entire journey. I'm not sure, I admitted. Closure? Understanding? To see the woman who held such power over my husband's imagination? Not his life, Eleanor said gently. Just his imagination. There's a difference. Is there? He chose you, she said firmly. Every day for 43 years, he chose you. The letters, they were a fantasy, a road not taken. We all have those, don't we? I thought about my own road not taken. The fellowship to study rare manuscripts in London that I declined when I became pregnant with our first daughter. The career I might have had. The person I might have become. Did you ever marry? I asked Eleanor. A smile touched her lips. Twice, actually. Both wonderful men in their own ways. My second husband passed 3 years ago. She gestured to a photograph on a nearby shelf. Eleanor with a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and a silver beard. Life is long, Margaret. Long enough for many loves. I stayed for dinner. Eleanor grilled fresh fish and vegetables from her garden, and we shared a bottle of wine as the sun set over the Pacific. We talked about our careers, our children, the changing world for women of our generation. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. As darkness fell, Eleanor lit candles around the cottage, their warm glow gilding the artwork and books. You know, she said, thoughtfully, refilling our glasses. Your husband's letters. They weren't really about me. What do you mean? The woman he wrote to, that Eleanor, she stopped existing in 1978. She was frozen in time, perpetually young, perpetually perfect, because she never had the chance to be real, to disappoint him, to leave the toilet seat up, or burn dinner, or grow old. I smiled at that. Richard hated how I squeezed the toothpaste tube from the middle. See? Eleanor's eyes crinkled warmly. Real love includes toothpaste disagreements. Fantasy love never has to deal with mundane realities. Before I left the next morning, Eleanor gave me a small potted plant, a cutting from her garden. Forget-me-nots, she said. Ironic, I know, but they're nearly impossible to kill, which makes them perfect for beginning gardeners. I placed the plant carefully on the passenger seat of my rental car. I'm not sure I have Richard's green thumb. It's not about talent, Eleanor said. It's about attention, about showing up day after day to tend something. That's what makes a garden grow. That's what makes anything worthwhile grow. On the drive back to San Francisco, I thought about the wooden box of letters waiting for me at home, about the garden my husband had planted in his final months, not as a betrayal, but perhaps as a reconciliation with his own past, his own choices. When I returned home, I did something unexpected. I expanded Richard's garden. I ordered seeds and plants, not just the ones he'd chosen to commemorate a long-ago love, but new varieties. Roses that my grandmother had grown. Lavender because I loved the smell. Black-eyed Susans because their cheerful faces had always made me smile. I joined a gardening club at the community center. Most of the members were widows like me, with soil under their fingernails and stories to share. One of them, Frank, a retired biology teacher with a dry wit and kind eyes, offered to help me install an irrigation system. The letters? I kept them, ultimately. Not displayed, but not destroyed either. They're part of my history now. Another dimension to the complex man I spent my life with. A man who chose duty and family over passion, but who never stopped wondering about the path not taken. Sometimes I wonder if Eleanor ever thinks about me, the woman Richard chose. I sent her a photograph of my expanded garden last spring. She replied with a watercolor she'd painted of forget-me-nots, with a note that read simply, "We are both part of his story now." My daughters visit more often these days. They bring my grandchildren, who love to help in the garden. My oldest asked me once why I'd taken up gardening so suddenly after their father died. Sometimes, I told her, we need to grow something new, to understand what we've always had. Last week, Frank helped me build a small bench beneath the maple tree where the forget-me-nots have spread into a dense blue carpet. We sat there together as the evening light filtered through the leaves, talking about books and travel and the mysterious ways life unfolds. I don't know if I'll ever love again the way I loved Richard, but I'm learning that the heart, like a garden, has seasons. There is time for dormancy and time for new growth. The letters in their wooden box sit on my bookshelf now. Not a secret anymore, but a story. One of many that make up a life. Not the story I thought I was living, perhaps, but one I can look at now with compassion for Richard, for Eleanor, and most importantly for myself. Because that's the thing about gardens and lives and loves. They never turn out exactly as we plan them. But with attention and care, they can become something unexpectedly beautiful, all the same.